This is Rabbanit Sarna and Rabbi David Wolkenfeld. Shalom and welcome to the Straw Hat. We are the official podcast of Anshe Shalom B'nai Israel Congregation, an Orthodox synagogue in the beautiful Lakeview neighborhood of Chicago, Illinois.
In this week's episode of The Straw Hat, we have a discussion of the Cholent Effect, an important tool for understanding Parshat Shavua this time of year. We have a discussion of some of the medical Halacha questions that are brought up by some assisted reproductive technologies, and we have an interview with Anna Rubin. I've spoken before about Rabbi Professor Mordechai Breuer and what he described as the Cholent Effect.
Is that when you go to the Hashkama Minyan?
No. It can be any time. Cholent Effect is when you go home from shul and have your cholent and then fall asleep and then you forget everything that you heard in that morning's Torah reading. And so the next week when you come to shul, it's like...
Or you show up for Shabbos Mincha.
Or you show up, even better, show up for Shabbos Mincha. It's like, oh, brand new story. Like, I never knew about these characters before. So there are like two major times where this occurs in like very significant ways. One is Parshat Noach, which is not the beginning of the story.
Noah story.
Yeah. It's like really important information about him that we get at the end of Parshat Bereshit. But you think, oh, well, I mean, the parsha is named after him, right? It's Parshat Noach, and it is a beginning of the Noach story, is at the beginning of Parshat Noach, but because of the Cholent Effect, we forget all the stuff we know about him from before. And this is even more dramatic, I think, in the with Parshat Lech Lecha and the Avraham story, or the Avram story, which does not begin in Parshat Lech Lecha.
Right, and if the story began in Parshat Lech Lecha, you would imagine that Avram was like just a dude going about his life, and all of a sudden he hears God say, go, and he's like, all right, time to go. And like, that's not really how, that it's really hard to identify, I think, with that narrative. I would say, like, as Jews in America in a time when the state of Israel beckons, I think that narrative is much harder to identify with than like this like slow, I've known my whole life I'm headed in this direction.
Oh, I see. Interesting. I think it's just sort of hard to understand and explain. What was it about Abraham
there's two questions, right? Like, what was it about Abraham that caused God to say Lech Lecha? And the flip question is, what was it about Abraham that caused him to listen when God said Lech Lecha?
And to be fair, nothing in the end of Parshat Noach really answers these questions, and I think this is left the midrashic tradition to fill in these major plot gaps in Avram's backstory. The origin story of Avraham is really left unsaid by the Torah. But we do get some more information from the end of Parshat Noach, which I think maybe it raises more questions than it answers, but it certainly gives us a fuller and I think very different understanding of Avram. So anyway, let's review for everyone who doesn't have if you're listening in the car, you don't necessarily have a chumash in front of you.
Okay, so we're in Bereshit Yud Aleph Pasuk Chaf Vav. Let's say we'll start there.
Otherwise known as the last few verses of Parshat Noach.
Exactly. So we have Vayechi Terach Shiv'im Shana. So Terach, it lives 70 years. Vayoled at Avram and Nachor at Haran. He has three sons, Avram, Nachor, Haran. And we know about that. And we know that Haran has this child named Lot. And then we also know that Haran dies. Vayamot Haran al pnei Terach aviv be'eretz moladeto b'Ur Kasdim. Haran dies in the land of Ur Kasdim, which is their birthplace. And the Midrash picks up on this trauma and constructs an entire story about how Haran died and why, and what is it about this place called Ur Kasdim also, like combines the death of Haran with the name of Ur Kasdim.
Yes, to come up and everyone can see Rashi for for more of that. And then the Torah continues, though.
Right, so they get married. Avram and his brother Nachor get married. Shemesh and Avram Sarai, Shemesh and Nachor Milcah, right? Avram's wife, as you know, is Sarai. Nachor marries a woman named Milcah. Amazingly, this name Milcah really survives in, like Jewish naming. Like my great grandmother was Milcah.
That wasn't a corruption of Malka?
Possibly, I don't know, maybe. She was always known as Milcah, and Haran's two daughters are Milcah and Yiska also. So, and Yiska for sure survives, right? So it's kind of like this interesting thing about that generation, that all the women in it have names that have kind of trickled their way down in one way or another.
That is interesting. Not thought of that before.
I don't have anything to say about that, but it is kind of interesting. And then
there are fewer female names in Tanakh overall, right? So you were sort of searching for.
Yeah, we don't use all of them. not all of them are great, Anyways, okay, so and some of them are great characters who we don't name after them. Well, who's that woman who lived for a really long time, like through the Sarach? Yeah, you don't know anyone named Sarach.
No, I don't.
Yeah. Also, because it kind of seems like masriach, like smelly. Anyways, yeah, no, I don't know a single Sarach, but she seems really cool. Anyways, okay, so we learned that Sarai has fertility issues. V'ti Sarai akara ein la valad. More on that in the other section of this podcast. V'yikach terach et Avram beno ve'lot ben. This is the part we wanted to talk about. V'yikach terach et Avram beno ve'lot ben Haran ben beno ve'et Sarai kalato ishet Avram beno v'yitzeu itam me'or kastim lalechet arza Canaan.
Wow. So Avram.
We should probably translate.
Please translate.
So Terach, Avram's dad, takes Avram and Lot and Sarai, and they leave Ur Kasdim together. And where are they going? They're going Arza Canaan. They're going to the land of Canaan, but they don't make it. Vayavo ad Haran. They go to Haran. Vayishvu sham, and they settle there.
Right. So Ur Kasdim, let's say, is in Mesopotamia, present-day Iraq, and they make their way from Iraq to, before highways and cars, the way to get from Iraq to Eretz Yisrael was not to go straight west through this vast and unpassable desert, but to go north and west, like to follow the rivers in the crescent of the Fertile Crescent, and to go through Syria. And so Avram's family stops in Syria and doesn't complete the journey, and then it's left for Avram in Parshat Lech Lecha to complete the journey. But he's completing a journey that was undertaken by his father. The Lech Lecha, go...
We sometimes also imagine, right? Lechacha mi'artzecha mi'moladetzecha. Avram's moledet is Ur Kasdim, and he's not there when Lechacha happens.
He's already left.
He's already in Haran.
And then to the land that I will show you, he was already
on his way there.
On his way to Canaan. So you sort of have you start with Lech Lecha. You think it's like a totally out of the blue, I'm just going to walk, and you'll say stop. But this is a place that his family has been traveling on for some time. For some reason, they get delayed on the journey, and Avram is completing a journey started by his father. So many, many ways to understand that. Ramban actually says that it didn't happen in this order, and so he answers the question by saying the Torah is telling us a story.
Classic Ramban, right? Saying that the Torah is not written in chronological order. This is one of the classic Ramban, Rashi, and others debate this question.
And he says to obscure the fact that Avram was leaving his father behind to make this journey, which is not such a nice thing to do. And so therefore the Torah obscures that by telling the story not in order. But I think even understanding it in order, I think, can tell us...
I think it actually makes it a little bit more gentle, right? Like that same exact question that the Ramban is asking of, Avram left his family. Is that something that we prize? Is that a good thing? It's Avram in this casting of it, minus the Cholent Effect, is fulfilling a goal of his family instead of kind of bye parents, God told me to go, time to go.
Yeah. And I think then in terms of the relevance for contemporary people, as you alluded to before, I think it makes it so much more relevant. This is an insight that I heard more than once from Rabbi that the difference between an Avraham and a normal person is not like he wakes up one morning hearing a voice from God and he does something totally strange and unprecedented and right. No, he's actually doing the exact same thing that he was doing before, that his father had done, that his family had done. He's going to the same exact place that he had been doing, but now he's doing it obeying God's command. And so to live a life in response to God's voice doesn't always mean a dramatic change in your lifestyle and how you act, and a dramatic change, of course, geographic. Right? It's just I'm just living my life, but now I'm doing it in response to God's call instead of for some other reason.
And I think the Midrash would have us feel. And this is a perfectly good casting of the story, right? That Avram did this massive break because he was monotheistic and his dad owned an idol store and all of that. And then in this casting, actually, he's in some ways fulfilling his family's destiny. It seems really kind of divergent from that Midrashic narrative.
Correct. Right. That school in the Midrash where he's a iconoclast and breaks with his family. Here he's really just, there's more continuity with his family. Again, they're not contradictory. You can, it's quite possible and quite common to be rebelling against one's parents against one's family, and also to
fulfilling
be
their dreams for
their
you.
dream. Yeah, this is extremely common,
100%.
right? So they're not really
totally.
in conflict, but I think these two ways of understanding the story are definitely distinct and sort of worth paying attention to where the story begins. And then later on, we can pay attention to where the story ends. I think the story maybe has more than one end as well. Something that I heard from Rabbi Silber, that this Avram story has two beginnings and it has two endings. So the two beginnings are this journey that Avram takes with his family and the beginning of Lech Lecha, and then there are going to be two endings, which we will come to when we come to them.
Yes. And in general, I would say that, back to just the Cholent Effect in general, like we sometimes like to place a lot of emphasis on these parsha breaks. And that's kind of, if you grow up in any kind of Jewish learning environment, whether that's Hebrew school or day school, there's so much emphasis on Parshat HaShavua that, and in Shul, right?
Or Shul.
And in Shul, right? If you go to Shul, there's a lot of emphasis on Parshat HaShavua. But if you think about how the Torah was read, kind of with a greater lens on that history, like the Torah was not always read divided up into the Parshiot HaShavua that we have. And in fact, like that's always a funny thing to think about around Simchat Torah, which we are obviously just putting behind us, that in Eretz Yisrael, the Torah was read on a triennial, not the type of triennial that some other denominations use today, but a triennial wherein you completed the whole Torah just every 3 years.
Right, just to clarify, there are some liberal congregations today that don't read the entire Torah portion
But they'll read a third of Noach, a third of Lech Lecha, as opposed to reading the whole Torah continuously just in a 3-year
right.
track.
That ancient system that died away, 800 or 900 years ago in Eretz Yisrael, that according to that older system, there was no Simchas Torah because you didn't finish the Torah every year, and the divisions were just different. They were like the Torah was divided not into whatever 40 something, whatever many parshiot was divided into 100 and something.
And we see the remnants of this because we expand and contract our Torah portions depending on the calendar, right? So some years we have Achrimot separate from Kedoshim. Like this past year was the longest, had the most days that a Hebrew calendar can possibly have, and therefore we had one contracted parsha, right?
Double portion.
One double parsha, and that was to catch up with Israel after Shavuot, something like that, Pesach, whatever it was, whatever holiday it was that we.
It was late, before Shavuot's time, yeah.
Yeah, and right, because even when we were in Israel this summer, I heard Chukat twice or something like that.
Yep.
So right, we didn't catch up for a long time, but right, and so in order to catch up, we contracted. But so even that, right, like, is it Achrimot Kedoshim or is it Achrimot and then Kedoshim? And those divisions are flexible because like those parsha distinctions are actually kind of almost not as important as we culturally emphasize them. And in fact, divisions of the Torah into we were talking about this in Mishmar recently, divisions of the Torah into anything are kind of late. And that's actually a confusing thing, meaning are the chapter, like the parak divisions are
medieval Christians,
right? 1200 Christian. I think the guy's name was Stephen Langdon. I don't know, I'm pulling that out of my like day school brain. And we've adopted them because they're extremely useful and they help us to talk about the Torah in a very clear, kind of specific way, as opposed to like the third aliyah of Achrimot says this, which is a little bit harder. But if you look at the way Rishonim reference things in the Torah, they basically just quote psukim and assume you know the rest of it by heart and can figure out what's going on, or the way the Talmud quotes.
Yeah.
Torah also.
You see this also when we shown him discuss the Talmud. There are no pages because there were no printed books in the time of the Rishonim, and so they say the beginning of this parak, of this chapter, the end of that chapter, right? And
that's how you have to really be holding, because they won't even list all the words of the beginning of that chapter. They'll just say like parak, like Chaf, Chubchik, Hey, and you have to know that's Parak Kol HaBasar in Cholent that contains like the vast majority of Hilchot Kashrut.
Right, so if you're studying your Idea, then that's usually the answer.
Yeah.
So that's sort of an interesting way in which pages are so useful, and having those citations are so useful that that we
kind of like give into them.
Yeah,
but really the Torah is meant to be this continuous thing that you know by heart. Theoretically, obviously it's the written Torah, so not as much by heart as the oral Torah.
I think I don't want to. I mean, originally sure, but I guess I don't want to privilege any frame of reference for Torah study over any other. I think that each have advantages, the insights. You look at like the classic Rishonim, they're mostly something Rashi, Ibn Ezra, Rashbam. It's like verse by verse, pasuk by pasuk. What does these words mean? What does this verse mean?
And the pasuk divisions, we should say, the pasuk divisions are Masoretic. Those are very, very old. That's like 6th century. No, older than that. I'm not even sure.
Well, it goes back. That Torah Shabbat goes back to Sinai.
Right.
The
written Masoretic, like as far as we know, I think is 6th century. But
I think later, but
fine,
doesn't matter. That goes back way.
But like the divisions between pasuk by pasuk, right? That's like we believe that to be from Sinai. And you don't really see debates over that in any.
No, but the frame of reference. In other words, like Rashi will tell you what this. I think we've some very, very dramatic examples where he'll explain the same word in contradictory, opposite ways, different verses, because like Rashi's agenda is what does this verse mean in its local context. Ramban, in his introductions to the 5 books of the Torah, will say, here's what this book is about, right? But I feel it's much more modern Torah scholarship, which will look at the structure of like Sefer Bamidbar, and what are the patterns and the the chiastic structure of this book, right? They're much more. It's a broader frame. And so I think there is it's a little orthogonal to our conversation, but that it was triggered to say this. I think there's just different types of scholarship that you can engage in and different things you can discover when your frame of reference is very, very narrow or very, very broad. And I think in different times in history, different types of observations were more common or more popular or more useful than others.
But I would say like when you're learning Torah, it's kind of all on the table, meaning the Torah has been divided up in so many different ways, right? So I wouldn't say, oh, you should divide up a pasuk and assume like I can read this half of the pasuk without the second half of the pasuk. I would say that's for sure like not right. But to say, oh, I'm interested in the themes of this parsha or this whole book, or right, like adjusting your lens in that way, I think is an old kind of Torah study tool and something that can be so interesting in all these different ways.
And worth being self-conscious and reflective about what your lens is. So if you're saying, so when people say, what are the themes of Parshat Lech Lecha, like, that's fine, but that's like that.
But just know that that's a choice you're making.
Like Jews lived according to the Torah and read the Torah every week in shul for many, many centuries before
Parshat Lech Lecha existed.
Exactly, and so it's a choice to then exclude the first beginning of the Avram story when you're gonna talk about the themes of Parshat Lech Lecha. Even though, on the other hand, Parshat Lech Lecha has been around for a very long time. It's a dominant way that we relate to the Torah, like hearing it read in shul according to these parsha divisions, and so that it has its own validity. And just like every choice, I think should be self-conscious about it and be aware of it. Sarah talks a lot about this in her work with Sefaria. Like digital technology allows even other tools of study and other frames of reference, and she encounters lots of people who have like nostalgic connections to one specific
layout of a page or something.
Right, and really it's just a stage in the technical development from scroll to codex to book, right, to digital technology. Like these are just stages of technology that allow us to study Torah, and again, each one has different advantages and disadvantages, and I think it's worth being self-conscious about the choice rather than just take for granted one particular technology or one particular method of citation or one particular somewhat artificial division of the Torah.
In summary, beware of the Cholent Effect. So for our next section, I wanted to zoom in on just one piece of information that we learned about Sarai in the end of Parshat Noach. It says, "Vatihi Sarai akara ein la valad," that Sarah was infertile and she didn't have a child. And this is in the context of Haran having a child named Lot. So we learned that Abraham and Sarah were not able to have children. And we wanted to use that as a jumping off point for some of the beginning of life issues that we get questions about a lot and that affect our community and the Jewish community and all humans, I think, really, really greatly at a certain stage of life.
Yeah, the other sort of prompt for our discussion of this was the post-Shachrit, weekday Shachrit Halacha learning. We are making our way through a book by my friend, my colleague, Rabbi Jason Weiner, who was here at Anshe Shalom a few years ago as a scholar in residence. He is a rabbi and chaplain in Los Angeles and has become, through his job as a hospital chaplain, a really important scholar of Jewish medical ethics and medical halacha. The book it's great because it has like really extensive footnotes, so you can dig in and follow up and do all the work yourself and check his sources. But the actual body of the book is quite accessible and just like very sort of easy to comprehend overviews of these topics in medical halacha and medical ethics. So beginning of life is certainly an area fraught with medical halacha, and so we wanted to sort of share some of those discussions with the podcast.
Yeah, why don't you start us off?
So one question that I've received more than once came from women who were undergoing some form of artificial insemination or implantation of an IVF created embryo, and they wanted to know if they needed to go to the mikveh before this procedure. Mm-hmm. The answer is no, they don't. That's sort of interesting, right? But like it's normally in people who are making babies without assisted reproductive technology. Those women do need to go to the mikveh before conceiving, and so that's where this question comes from. But for a medical procedure of this kind, there's absolutely no need to go to the mikveh.
And the halachic source for this is kind of amazing. So there's a book that didn't make its way into Tanakh, but does make it. So the rabbis quote it in the Talmud, called Ben Sira, and it's Jewish tradition that gets quoted. I think by Rishonim is the earliest we have it. I'm not sure it's actually in the Talmud.
I think it is.
It is in the Talmud?
I think it is, yeah.
Okay. That how was Ben Sira born? His mother was in a bathtub that a man had used previously, and she became inseminated. And that is how Ben Sira, which is, by the way, this book of very interesting wisdom literature, a lot about kind of how amazing the Torah is.
It's in the Catholic Bible, right?
It's in the Apocrypha.
It's called Ecclesiasticus, isn't it?
I have no idea. I believe you. Or it could be called Ben Sira. I wouldn't know.
Okay.
Can bring Ethan back. He'll tell us.
this we can. Google will tell us this as soon as we start recording.
It's true. Anyway, so that's like kind of the earliest Jewish source that we have for artificial insemination of like women becoming impregnated in a bathtub. I don't know whether that's actually like physically possible, but whatever.
I think definitely not. I think definitely
probably
not. I think that's like a middle school sex ed tells you that's not possible.
But it's great legal precedent for us in a world where we genuinely do have artificial insemination, because she was, I think the legend goes that she was Nida at the time and became pregnant. And so as long as there's no intercourse involved, you can become pregnant while you're Nida, and there's no halachic issue involved in that.
I'm always struck by these types of medical halachic like sources from which are these sort of somewhat obscure agadot stories, legends, that are then used as like authoritative legal precedents for these sort of new halachic.
Totally.
I think it's a really interesting question, sort of worth maybe a sort of fuller discussion. If you're learning, we have an unbroken chain of halachic adjudication on the kashrut of chickens, right? We know exactly, and you can, every place where Jews have lived, at every century, at every generation, there are chicken questions. And so if you're studying, like, is my chicken kosher? Like, there's a genre of, like, what that, it's a field, which has rules, which has sources and precedent and like unbroken chain. When you give these new medical
like you have a case, my egg and my spouse's sperm are being incubated inside a third human being. Like that is inconceivable for like the vast majority of halachic history until the last couple of years. And so, then you have to find precedent because we want to feel like every decision we make today is connected back to Sinai.
Correct.
And so how do you do that with these amazing new technologies?
Yeah. So the approach is to find these very far-fetched precedents, and that tends to be what's done. I think it's a complicated move to make because you're taking texts that were not in the original context, and as they were understood for centuries, were not understood to be legally helpful for like how we live our lives and decisions we make practically, and now that's how they're being used. I think that's interesting. So another sort of beginning of life halacha question I've received more than once concerned somebody who was undergoing fertility treatment, that they were just like hormonal treatment as part of fertility, and she needed to take injections of some hormone. And the question was concerning taking those injections on Shabbat, right? Generally, we don't engage in medical interventions on Shabbat.
We don't hurt ourselves on Shabbat.
Hurt ourselves on Shabbat. We don't cause bleeding on Shabbat. We don't measure things out on Shabbat. Right? These are all, that measuring is Rabbanit, healing is Rabbanit, and causing bleeding is a Deraita, right? So there are all sorts of intentionally causing bleeding is a Deraita, right? So,
it's not like, I tripped on the sidewalk, I violated a Deraita.
Yeah, and here the bleeding that's the bleeding that's the outcome of a injection is also not intentional bleeding as well. Right. But so these are all there's no biblical, issues at play here for this. And she wants to know, could she violate Shabbat in these rabbinic violations in order to undergo this fertility treatment? So in general, the threshold for medical intervention on Shabbat that doesn't involve a dioraita would be someone who is so sick that they are holech lemishkav, right? I'm bedridden.
Can't get out of bed.
I'm bedridden, which I was taught many, many years ago that the definition of that, my ailment is so severe that my normal course of behavior is curtailed. So my headache is so bad that instead of going to the Shabbos afternoon class, I just want to take a nap. Or I'm going to stay indoors in a dark room instead of hanging out, going to Kiddush or whatever.
So the question becomes, is infertility like a headache?
So exactly. So what do we compare it to, right? So on one hand, this woman is entirely, she looks completely healthy. She
wants to go to the afternoon class. She'll make it,
Yes. Right. She's engaging in all normal physical behavior. She's eating normally. She's very active. She's energetic. She's full of health and vigor. She's prepared to become pregnant and carry a baby. Very, very like the spitting image of health. On the other hand, she needs these injections in order to help her conceive. So the way in which we come to understand, we say that, well, actually, her inability to conceive without these injections, that's an organ system of her body that isn't functioning appropriately. Her reproductive system, her ovaries are not functioning as they should. They need these injections to function as they should. And so even though everything else is thankfully very healthy, her ovaries are not. They're it's a form of organ failure, right? And
like that,
it's a treatable organ form. It's so it's really maybe similar to a diabetic who could be quite healthy, except whatever their hormonal balancing system isn't functioning as it should. Their insulin production and regulation system isn't functioning as it should, and they need injections. This woman's ovaries aren't functioning as they should. She needs injections. So in that sense, this definitely meets the threshold for these rabbinic violations of Shabbat. She can measure the medication in the syringe. She can inject herself, and she can do that. And I think, this is... thankfully, my understanding is that these injections worked successfely in all of the cases that I was about which I was consulted in these cases, and so it's at least a happy ending to these stories.
Yeah, that's great. Another one that we've gotten from time to time, also relating to Shabbat, is I have to travel to the hospital or to the fertility clinic or whatever it is on Shabbat. And so obviously it depends where the fertility clinic is and what modes of transit are available to you. But that's another one where we've always been encouraging of let's figure out how to get you there with the fewest kind of possible Shabbat violations, but without question of if you have to go to the fertility clinic on Shabbat, you have to go to the fertility clinic. Right, because again, this would be it's generally possible to do a lot of travel without violating a biblical prohibition, and to the extent that Right. We don't biblical violations of Shabbat are for when someone's life is in danger, right? So someone's life is in danger, and the fertility analog, if a woman in labor, right? She can drive herself to the hospital, or anyone who needs to can drive to the hospital, and she wants, her physician or her husband or her sister to be there in the hospital with her because that's what she needs for her psychological well-being while she's in this life-threatening situation of being in active labor. Yeah, that's done. Okay, we don't ask questions. She signs the forms in the hospital. Whatever that has to be done is done. Jewish OBGYN can do the incisions if that's necessary, whatever's necessary to save life. We do on Shabbat. We don't, right? But here, life is not in danger. But this is again she's experiencing organ failure of her, or the husband is experiencing organ failure of his or her reproductive organs, reproductive system, and so rabbinic violations of Shabbat for somebody with that type of medical problem is generally allowed. And so how can we get you to the place where this can be done, where you can receive the treatment that you need without violating Shabbat biblically? And so that's, Uber is very helpful for that. Yeah. And public transit,
credit card, right? Ways, maybe even, and there are, whatever, people can consult with their local Orthodox whomever listening just to figure out the nuances of how to do this in the best possible way. But the big picture, this is something that's done.
Yeah, totally. And I guess the point we want to make is if this is you, if you're listening to this and this is affecting your life, come talk to us. We want to be able to show up for you. Also, we want to be able to support you in it, even if you don't have any specific question. You just want to, sit and talk about it. We talk to people about these issues a lot. We are here for you.
And that's a good sort of segue, not just us, like the community is really here for you. I think it's one of the hardest things about experiencing infertility is that sense of being isolated from everyone else who's having lots of babies and all the children in the shul, etc. And in fact, so many of those children were conceived after a lot of heartache and with a lot of medical assistance. And people don't advertise that or know that, but and I only know, I'm sure, a small fraction of those cases, and I'm sure it's much broader. But we do offer an infertility big brother, big sister, little sibling program. We can match somebody who is currently experiencing infertility or undergoing treatments with someone 5 or 10 or 20 years older who is a parent who went through some similar path and
who could just show up for you also.
Yeah, if you want someone to send you an encouraging text message the day of an IVF implantation, or who can meet you for lunch, or even, I don't know, maybe drive you to the clinic to get a shot with, your partner can't do that. That's,
And there's also there's a nurse in our community who has told me that she's available to do shots for people if that's something that you or your partner or whatever don't feel comfortable doing at home. She'll just meet you, or you can go to her house and she'll do it. So there's all sorts of softer resources that this community can make available to you if that's what you're looking for, and if there's some way that we can help.
Yeah. And people also, we also as a religious community, we also daven for people. We have, you can put yourself on our Cholent list, our Mishaberach list, if you feel that the tefillot of the community would be a source of support at this time. We also, every year on Simchat Torah, now for the second year we've done this, at the Kol Na'arim Aliyah, I recite a fertility prayer, a Mishaberach for those experiencing infertility that is shared by an Israeli organization called Yesh Tikva, which exists to provide support for Jewish people experiencing infertility. I think it's a beautiful tefillah. It speaks of all of our imahot and other women in Jewish tradition in Tanakh who struggled with infertility, and all of the righteous men and women throughout the generations who faced this struggle. And
as a Leah, it's this prayer is always so funny for me to hear because she gets left off.
She's left off,
and she's switched for Hannah.
Right.
And I was I always hear it, and I'm like, what about me? And then it's like, oh right, she didn't have problems.
Right. She had a lot of other problems. This
other
one she
problems,
didn't have.
right.
Which is also, I guess, a good reminder. Everyone has
their own sorrows.
Not with it's not worth being jealous of other people, because undoubtedly they have all sorts of.
Right, it's true, and people who are going through infertility, especially in a community ours, where there's a baby born every other day, there's no way to. I mean, maybe there's some tzaddikim out there who can avoid it.
There are many reasons to be jealous of lots of other people, but I'm just saying, the more you know, the less. I don't know. As I've gotten older, I've I've just discovered too many really deep, tragic elements of the lives of people who might have been felt some jealousy of, to kind of that's helped me get over at least that one petty vice.
I would say the other. Okay, so we say that fertility prayer on at Kol Na'arim every year, which is a beautiful thing. The other resource that we have that should not go unmentioned is the mikvah has a lot of resources and tefillot for people who and the mikvah has kind of historically been this time for women to pray for these exact sorts of things. And also, if part of your fertility quest involves when can I go to the mikvah, how can I get to the mikvah earlier, questions like that, I am definitely here for those questions. I know that Rabbanit Wolkenfeld has a lot of experience with that, and literally there are cases where getting to the mikvah a day or two earlier is a make or break in fertility, and thank God our community really does have resources to provide halachic assistance with that. And I've definitely kind of coached people through day by day of I did this check at this time, it came out like this, what happens now, and getting people to the mikvah in a way that enables their fertility process.
Yes, absolutely. I would just it's even more proactively than that, which is good Hilchot Nida education can help babies come into the world, and myths and misconceptions and poor education and just false things that kind-hearted but unqualified college teachers say make it harder for babies to come into the world. I think this is one of those areas of halachic knowledge where the stakes could not be higher. If you have some extra chumras in your kitchen, okay, Because hey, go ahead, great for you,
Yeah.
But some extra.
We do not encourage extra chumras in your nida practice.
Or at least to choose them very wisely in ways that don't prevent fertility.
Right. And the other thing I would say about the mikvah, just to round that out, is that I've heard from many women that they found our mikvah to be just like a particularly supportive environment, that they've kind of gone to the mikvah with certain, like if you have a mark of like, this is where you have to put this injection, and then like the mikvah attendant kind of, I don't know, like shows solidarity with that. And so I've just heard all these beautiful stories of people for whom that attention that they got at the mikvah was very much like wanted and needed, and that the mikvah and the community feel of our mikvah was able to provide that in a very beautiful way for them. So hopefully, I would love to always hear more of those stories. And we're always, particularly our mikvah director, is always on a path towards encouraging that exact type of feeling in our mikvah.
And people who feel you can provide that kind of compassion and discretion to ask to be mikvah attendants. There's always
there's always a need for more mikvah attendants.
I'm very happy to be interviewing Anna Rubin today for the podcast. Anna and I know each other for many, many years from her time as an undergraduate at Princeton when Sarah and I worked there. And it's always fun when our students follow us to Chicago. And Anna's a little bit different from some of our other interviewees. She's not a member of Anshe Shalom, but she uses Anshe Shalom as a Jewish resource, and I think that's sort of an interesting perspective that she can offer. So tell us a little bit about how Anshe Shalom fits into the mosaic of Jewish institutions that sustain your life here in Chicago.
Yeah, well, I remember when you all first moved here, and Sarah described Lakeview as like a Hillel, but a community, and like everyone kind of goes between different shuls and is friends with people in different congregations. And when I moved here, it was so exciting to see that actually wasn't just hype, but it was very true. And so it's, so fun for me to be able to go to Shul Anshe Emet, but then come to Anshe Shalom for Mincha Mariv, or to come for weekday minyan or holidays, or just be able to have community in these different communities and know people who are a part of different communities and amongst these communities.
So what are the congregations that are on your Rolodex of places you attend? I
go to Anshe Emet every week. I come to ASBI pretty regularly. I go to Mishkan, and then because of the work I do, I'll go to congregations across the city and suburbs. So
tell us a little about that's a good segue. What is the work that you do?
Yeah, so I'm a community organizer at the Jewish Council on Urban Affairs. I kind of work on our immigration justice work, but I also oversee our congregation partner work. And that means I get to visit and spend time with our 12 congregation partners and just get to know what the broad Jewish congregational landscape in Chicagoland is.
Can you say a word about the broad congregational landscape in Chicago?
Can I? Yes. I mean, I think it's just exciting, right? It's fun to have attended both, services and social action events at all of these different kinds of congregations, and see that every congregation kind of has its own approach to, both talking about social justice and just being Jewish in their community. And so, right, from Mishkan, it's inspired down-to-earth Judaism, and really what does that mean for them to embody that? And for, talking about ASBI and being an urban modern Orthodox congregation, what does it really mean to embody that? I think it's cool to realize that it isn't just duplicative, but every congregation is really bringing something unique depending on the community. That's
really special. I found that too, and I think that is a special thing about our community. In terms of the ways in which someone like you can take advantage of different congregations as to serve as Jewish resources for you, do you think that is? To me, I think that's a really almost unique aspect of this neighborhood, of this community. Is that, have you experienced that elsewhere? Do you have friends in other communities who found that in the same way?
No, I think this is different, right? I mean, I don't know if people have had conversations with friends who live in New York, for example, where it's like, this is where you go Friday night and this is where you go Saturday and this is what you do. And it feels very kind of mandated and siloed in some way. And that's kind of the opposite of how it feels here. Yeah, and so I somebody asked me recently, do you feel like you have a rabbi? So I feel like I have many rabbis. I feel like I have a whole slew of people who I can turn to depending on what the issue, the question, the event is.
Fantastic. Well, that's really good. I agree that we're all pretty lucky to live in a place like this neighborhood in Chicago, and I'm glad you feel the same way, and I hope to keep seeing you at Anshe Shalom whenever we can serve as a resource for you and your friends and anyone else. And I think that the shul's really... we're really proud to be a resource for people who come every day and people who come once or twice a week and people who come once or twice a year. If we can be a resource, we're really happy to serve in that capacity. Okay,
Thanks.
So thank you for coming in and being interviewed.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Straw Hat Podcast. We are always appreciative of your positive feedback. Let us know how you found this episode stimulating and interesting and helpful. And you can reach us via email and phone and text or find us in person at shul. Negative feedback can be placed into the new Hashkama crockpot, which is also large enough to double as a hot tub.